Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for our Madison Network webinar. My name is Emma Maynard, and I'm the Assistant Director of Career and Network Programming here at JMU for the Office of Alumni Relations. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Madison Network. The Madison Network is a valuable resource JMU instills in each of us simply by being connected to the university through our own personal Madison experience. The Madison Network is not something you have to join. It's something you are already a part of as a member of the JMU community. The benefits of the Madison Network come alive through connection, conversation, and engagement with one another and the university through participation in things like today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar presenter, Katie Wethman. Katie presented our previous webinar, 5 Mistakes Home Buyers Make, and today she'll be sharing 5 mistakes home sellers make. Katie is a 94 graduate of JMU, earning her double major in accounting and finance. A few years later in public accounting is where she earned her CPA. She returned to school and graduated with an MBA from the Darden Graduate School of Business Administration at the University of Virginia. Prior to entering the real estate field, she worked for the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, Freddie Mac, Corporate Executive Board, and Deloitte Consulting. Katie is a member of the National Association of Realtors, the Virginia Association of Realtors, and the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors. In 2017, the Wethman Group closed nearly 100 transactions, totaling more than $38 million in volume. She has been quoted in such publications as the Washington Post, Washington Examiner, Bankrate.com, The Street, and Forbes. Katie frequently teaches educational seminars designed for first-time buyers in Arlington County, where she lives, Fairfax, DC, and Montgomery County. Her approach has been invaluable to many clients, and she works to make every client a lifelong relationship by providing advice and resources before, during, and after the transaction. Katie is licensed in Virginia, DC, Maryland, and Delaware, and has a network of quality agents in all major markets. With that, I'm excited to hear more about the 5 mistakes home sellers make, and we'll turn things over to Katie.
Thanks so much, Emma. It's my pleasure to be here with the Madison Network today, talking about some of the mistakes we see home sellers make. My team and I have been in business for a little more than 12 years now, so we've seen quite a few mistakes that people make on both the buy side and the sell side over those years. I have a team of 8, and as you mentioned, we do somewhere north of 85 transactions a year on average, so that's about half buyers and half sellers. And I would say a little more than 85% of our business is repeat and referral, which we're really proud of. That means that clients think we did a good job, and we appreciate them thinking of us and sending their friends and family to us in the future. So I'm happy to talk about some of the mistakes that we've seen in our experience, and there are 5 things I'm going to cover today, each one in a little bit of detail. The first is when sellers don't understand the current market conditions. The second is not doing the prep work that's required to make sure that you get the highest return on your investment. The third would be about valuation and using incorrect valuation methods when they set the price that's appropriate for their market. The next mistake would be negotiating without a game plan. Too many people let emotion get in the way or shoot from the hip without an end game in mind. So we'll talk about some tips for that. And then finally, assembling the wrong team. Your team is comprised of agents and lenders and appraisers and inspectors, and it's important that you choose the right people for yourself and that you also evaluate the people on the other side's team to make sure that your transaction is going to go smoothly. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about market conditions. So obviously, real estate is local, and so depending on where you're watching this webinar from, your market conditions might be very different from my market conditions. But it's important that you review with your agent the statistics for your local market and not just go based on what you've heard or what you've read in a big newspaper, because they may not be talking about your specific market. Even within a metropolitan market like Washington, D.C., where I work, there are submarkets, and those submarkets can be based on location, whether it's downtown D.C. or the suburbs or the exurbs, but they can also be based on a price point. So for example, at an entry-level price point, we might see a lot more competition than we see in what we call the upper brackets, or the multi-million-dollar homes. So even within the single market, you might have many different submarkets, and that's what you need to talk about with your agent. You also want to understand the interest rate trends, both nationwide, but again, in your local market, because loan limits differ from area to area. There are some markets that have been designated by the federal government as high loan limit areas. So the DC market, for example, falls in that category. And so the conventional loan limit is cut off at $679,650, which I know seems like a very odd number. It's not a nice round one that we can remember, but it's a very important number, because what it means is that buyers will get a more competitive interest rate if they're borrowing less than that amount. So when you're setting a price for your house, if you're going to be priced somewhere near that loan limit, or somewhere near that loan limit plus what would be a typical down payment in your area, whether you price a little bit higher, 10,000 higher or 10,000 lower, could really significantly make larger or make smaller your pool of buyers. So you really need to pay attention to those loan limits and the interest rate trends that are going along with those loan limits. Similarly, you might be thinking about the offer to pay some of the buyer's closing costs. So again, it depends on your price point in your market. Sometimes that's very common, other times not. But at entry-level price points in particular, it could be a way to entice some buyers to make an offer. But in general, I will say that a lower price is going to be more effective, because when buyers are searching online, there is always going to be a field to search on price, but there is very rarely, almost never, a price to search on whether or not the seller will pay closing costs. So that's usually buried in a text field somewhere. So you're going to be better off saying, going with a lower price rather than saying you're going to pay the closing costs in most cases. And the last point I want to make on this slide is the seasonal trends, and I have a little bit of detail here on the next page. This is so important for sellers. I know that sellers are juggling a lot, and a lot of times the seasonal trends are tied to the school years because people don't want to disrupt their family when school's still in session. But what I've laid out here is on the top line, the inventory, so starting from spring and then going all the way through next winter, or a winter. And then the bottom line is the number of buyers who have written offers and are under contract. And what you can see is that seasonal increase in inventory in the spring. So from March to April, May, and June, that's really where we see the bump. And then you see a secondary bump in the fall. And a lot of times that secondary bump is more closely correlated to condos and townhouses rather than single-family detached homes, again, because of that school year disruption factor. But the other thing I want to point out here is the decrease in inventory in December, January, and February. And look at February in particular. It's really a missed opportunity that a lot of sellers don't think about. But look where the buyers are from that December, January, February. They all have a New Year's resolution where they come out and they're ready to buy. They're excited about the spring market, but the sellers aren't quite there yet. There's not that increase in inventory. So what we end up seeing is a lot of bidding wars in February, believe it or not, because the buyers are out there ready to buy, but the listings are just not there. So you might think about whether or not it makes sense to go on the market very early in the year, like January or February, especially if your house has some sort of statistic or flaw or feature that maybe isn't as desirable. So maybe it backs up to a highway, or it's close to commercial space or industrial space. So something that makes it a little harder to compete in the spring. Your best bet might be to go on the market a little earlier in that January or February timeframe. The next mistake we see sellers make is not doing the prep work. And a lot of times people mistake a seller's market to mean I don't need to prepare anything, and that's just not true. HGTV has really been a double-edged sword. It has educated our buyers like never before, but it has also made them dislike projects. They expect a house to be move-in ready and to be staged and ready for them. And often buyers don't even have the cash for the projects, even if they want to do them. So in other words, they're scrimping all their pennies to come up with the down payment and the closing costs. So it's important that a lot of the major projects are done and that the house projects and shows as clean and ready for them. So if nothing else, you definitely need to declutter. Declutter, declutter, declutter. Pack away all of those personal items, anything like from family photos to religious items to school-related items. Sorry, Dukes, it's time to put away those JMU things. Anything political in our area, they're all no-nos. They all need to be put away because we want the buyer to focus on the house, not the stuff. We want them to be able to picture themselves, not picture you. And then finally, and agents can help you, by the way, with contractors for all of these projects. So any good agent who's been around for a while does have trusted and affordable contractors that they can refer to you. But finally, we want to talk about staging. Staging is absolutely critical. Stagers and agents who are accredited stagers can help you make the best use of what you have. It varies from bringing in rented furniture, artwork, and accessories to just working with what you have, maybe packing some things away and reorganizing some other things. Buyers really don't have the vision we want them to have. We have to help them get there. So work with your agent, see if your agent has an outside stager that can help you make the most of what you have and maybe bring in some supplemental items as well. So the top ROI projects, the things you're going to get your best bang for your buck would be decluttering, which we talked about, a fresh coat of paint, especially if you're going to do it yourself. It's very inexpensive to do and really makes the house pop and look nice and clean. Usually we recommend a light gray or a beige, but not white. So ask your agent for a recommendation. New or clean carpet and flooring, another great bang for your buck. It just really makes the space pop. In the springtime especially, we want you to look at your curb appeal and your landscaping. That entryway needs to be really inviting and cleaned up. Don't forget that this is where the agent and the potential buyer are going to be standing there for a few minutes while the agent's fumbling with the keys and trying to get access to the house. So you want to make sure that there's something fresh, clean, and interesting and creates a nice, loving feeling for that buyer while they're standing there waiting. And then staging, of course, that we talked about. I get the question a lot, should I update my kitchens and bathrooms? And the answer is maybe. It really depends on whether you're talking about brief, small cosmetic updates or you're talking about a full renovation job. And it depends what some of the comps are showing and what some of your neighbors might have done in the past. So this is something you need to be really careful about and discuss with your realtor because it's easy to spend a lot of money on those types of renovations and you may or may not get your money back. So don't assume that kitchen and bathroom updates are going to be worth it. It's quite possible they are, but it's really a case-by-case basis. So you need to talk about that with your team. I'm going to give a quick example of staging here. There was a property that coincidentally was on the market in both 2016 and 2017 in our property, so in our market. So it's a perfect example of the difference that photography and staging can make. So on the top here, you can see it sold for $640,000. And these are professional photographs, but this was a staging that was done by an agent who said that she had her own material she was going to bring in to stage the rooms. And you can see that she did that. She has clearly shown what the dining space looks like, what an office might look like, and what a nursery might look like. But look at the difference for the full-on staging with rental furniture from an outside stager on the bottom, where you can really see just how much bigger that space is. Look at that middle picture where you can see a full-size bed and a dresser versus that little desk. You really get a better sense for the space. So it photographs well, it shows better in person, and then that nursery, that one tiny little piece that looked a little sad, now we can see there's a full-size desk and some artwork and a chair, so it really makes the space look more usable. And that difference really came through in the price because while the market was a little stronger in 2017, that alone did not support this price differential that was just so big between these 2 years in this exact same house. The photography angle, too, makes a big difference here. Look how much better that kitchen looks in the bottom photograph versus the top one. It looks a little isolated and cut off and very small in that top photograph, where in the bottom, it really shows it as part of a larger entertaining space. So again, directing the photographer and choosing the right team to market your home matters. So let's move on to some valuation method errors that we see people make. The value of the property is going to be determined by what someone's willing to pay for it and what you're willing to accept. So there are a lot of things that don't matter when we're talking about valuation. The number one thing we look for, though, is the current market conditions and the recent comparable sales in the neighborhood. Those are really our best benchmarks. We don't rely on the automated valuation methods on websites. They're often wildly off, either positive or negative, especially if your house is unique or has been updated versus some recent sales. Those automated sites don't know that and can't calculate for it. Tax assessments are another thing we have people ask about, and they're really not a good indicator of current value. They're a lagging indicator. They also tend to run a little bit below market value in our experience. What you paid for the property is another thing. We have a lot of sellers who say, but I paid this, and I've put this much money into the kitchen and this much money into the bathrooms. And unfortunately, while that may help it sell faster, you're probably not going to get the full recoup of that investment in your sales price. It's possible you might, but likely it's very rare to have a 100% return on investment when you do those types of updates. So you want to price the property strategically to attract the largest pool of buyers as early as possible without giving up too much. And there is a lot of strategy to choosing the right price, as we alluded to earlier. So I have a quick example of a seller we worked with earlier this year, and it was a house in DC. We went on the market for $650. We ended up getting 2 offers, both at around $655. So we went with one of those offers. The problem was that everything else in the neighborhood, very similar homes nearby, had only sold for about $600. So when the appraiser came out, it only appraised for $600. So we were unfortunately required to renegotiate the price because the buyer's lender would not budge on the appraisal. So they could only get a loan based on the appraised amount. So we ended up renegotiating a final sales price just about in the middle at about $625,000. But see how that compares to some of the other numbers that I was talking about on the previous slide. Some of those automated estimates, they ranged from $725 to $837. The tax assessed value was at $656, so right around where we ended up listing. But the previous high in the neighborhood, the previous comparable sale, was only $590. So unfortunately, that ended up being the biggest driver in this scenario because that was the amount that the lender could borrow. And we knew that other lenders were going to have the same challenge. So we ended up having a buyer. Fortunately, when we were negotiating, we knew that this buyer had a little bit of cash. So even though they could only get a loan up to the $600,000 mark, we knew that they had some extra cash to be able to make up that differential in our final negotiation. And that's why it's so important to go into those negotiations with a clear game plan. You need to know what your risks are going in so that you choose an appropriate offer, you negotiate an appropriate offer with that buyer. So when you're choosing how to price and what to go after, you need to think about how long you've been on the market, how long your competition has been on the market. Do you expect multiple offers, or are there a lot of competing properties that your buyer might end up going to? You need to think about the timing and whether a buyer can accommodate your move timeline. We want to make sure that you don't end up with no houses to live in and that you don't end up with 2 houses that you need to pay for. So the timing does get pretty tricky here. So you want to consider when you're moving, you want to consider rent back costs and storage costs in that bottom line calculation when you're coming up with your end game. So if the price is not what you hoped for, try to negotiate some of those other things that affect your timing that in turn affects your costs. So probably most importantly, we need to talk about your risk. What are the proposed contingencies that a buyer is putting into their offer? Talk through the potential costs of each one of those and the potential that each one of them is going to be a factor. So for example, in that last situation, we talked extensively with our seller before we even went on the market about the previous comps and the fact that we were very likely to have appraisal issues, and in fact that came to pass. So when you're evaluating the offer, you also want to look at the experience of the agent and the lender on the other side. You want to make sure that they have a history of closing deals and make sure that they aren't inexperienced in your area. And then finally, think about your negotiation style. I know it's really hard, but you want to check your emotions at the door and have your agent help you focus on the end result. So while getting a lowball offer might seem offensive at first, you'd be surprised at how often we're able to work something out that's acceptable to both parties. We can come up with a win-win solution for everybody. You need to work through that initial response and get to a workable deal. So it's probably going to be possible, and it's probably going to be in your best interest. The last mistake is assembling the wrong team. Your agent might be the quarterback, but you're the coach. You need to pick the right players for your team and put them into the game at the right time. An experienced agent should have a roster of qualified professionals, everything from stagers to contractors to title attorneys, who can help you have a smooth transaction. So here are some tips for choosing the right agent. It's okay to interview. Meet with a few people and see who's a good fit. Ask them about their experience, about their strategy, but make sure to choose somebody who does this full time, because this is one of the biggest assets that you're going to have, and it's a great opportunity to build some long-term wealth. So understand how both your agent and the buyer's agents get paid, because it's usually you as the seller who's paying them. Keep in mind that commissions are negotiable. Next, you want to make sure that your agent can adequately explain to you both the process and the market conditions. And again, you want those market conditions to be as detailed as possible for your specific type of house, in your specific neighborhood, and for your specific price range. And finally, make sure that your agent has recent and relevant experience. I'm often asked, well, how much is enough experience? And I would look for someone who's been in the business at least 5 years and has done at least 15 to 20 transactions a year. And the reason I say that is because, over the course of a year, 15 to 20 is really only about 1.5 to 2 transactions a month. So that's really not that many. You want somebody that has that number of data points, or a team that has that number of data points, so that they can really have their fingers on the pulse of the market, and they can help you react quickly if that market is changing. So here's another example from our experience using teamwork to move a listing that was on the market for over a year. The situation was where the husband had passed away and leaving the wife in unexpectedly difficult financial straits. And it was listed for over a year with a, quote, top producer at another firm, and they got 0 offers in that year. Now, unfortunately, she had no budget for updates, and it was obviously a very emotionally difficult time for her. She didn't really want to have to sell the house. She was thrust into this situation. So we pulled together our team of local experts, where we brought in some stagers and we used some existing furniture in their house. We helped them decide what to pack away and how to rearrange things to really make the space show better. We helped coordinate a clean out. Some of the items went to auction, some became donations, some went to junk. We all have lots of stuff, and the house we live in, especially when we've been in a house a long time, is very different from the house we're trying to sell. So the result was that we were able to get a contract in less than 60 days. We ended up getting multiple offers, so the family was very happy, and it avoided a foreclosure situation and really helped her have the financial means to move on to the next stage of her life. So I hope this helped you with some of the pitfalls to avoid when you're selling your house. Feel free to contact us to start your search, sell your home, or with any questions, or for a referral to a reputable agent in any city.
Katie, thank you so much for providing our viewers with some concrete ways that they can elevate their own selling experience and maybe avoid some of the headaches and stress that can come along with that. Kind of talking about the stress that can come with selling your home, do you have some tips that some of our sellers can maybe execute, between that period of maybe the contract's been signed and now they're just waiting out for that final close?
Sure. I think that one of the most stressful things for sellers after the contract's already been accepted is dealing with the home inspection and repairs. And there are some things you can do to make that process go a little more smoothly. Hopefully you did a walkthrough with your agent and identified things to repair in advance before you even went on the market. So there are some cosmetic things, of course, but in a house we all have things that we just sort of live with and deal with over time, and we never really bother paying somebody to fix because they don't bother us that much. Well, all of those things are going to come up in a home inspection. Home inspectors are very detailed. They get paid to find things in your home, so of course they're going to have a long report. And I've never met a seller who says they're worried about the home inspection. Most sellers say, oh, they're not going to find anything. They always find things. So I would say start early with some of the repairs, really go through with a critical eye to address things in advance. Even if the contract has already been signed, but you haven't yet gone through the home inspection, it's not too late. Go ahead and fix those things that you've been putting off so that you can have a shorter home inspection report between contract and close.
That's great advice. And then just thinking about your years of experience working with your clients, if you could kind of sum up, I know you did an awesome job of giving us those 5 mistakes to avoid, hopefully, but if you could sum something up to provide our sellers to take with them, what would that advice be?
Well, I will say it's not easy, but it is simple, and that is to stop thinking about your house as your home. You need to shift gears and think of it as an asset that you're trying to maximize that value so that you can build long-term wealth and pull some of that return out of that asset. And your agent should be able to help with that, but you know it's so hard to not get emotional about that process and not take it personally. But you really need to try to get into that space where you stop thinking of it as a home and start thinking about it as an asset.
Thank you so much, Katie. And on behalf of the JMU Alumni Association and the Madison Network, I want to thank you for presenting this information for us today. And anyone that's tuning in that's also curious about the buying side of things, as I mentioned, check out Katie's 5 Mistakes Home Buyers Make as well. And so you can watch this webinar again or others like it at alumni.jmu.edu in the Madison Network section of our website. I hope that everyone has a great day. Thanks for tuning in, and go Dukes.